I woke up before the sun, as I always have my entire life. The silence in the house was still intact, broken only by the sound of the kettle on the stove and the soft clink of the spoon in my glass of milk coffee. My suitcase had been ready for days, tucked in the corner of the room beside the shelf where I keep my travel books, and that thick photo album filled with memories from when we were still a family that moved as one. I was never a man of many words, but that day I had prepared a small surprise, a brand new pair of sneakers, bought with care and patience, because I wanted to walk comfortably through those streets I had only seen in photos. It was a special trip, and I had helped make it happen. The idea had come up months earlier, on a lazy Sunday. We were all on the porch. Mariana, my daughter, was excitedly talking about the boys' school break, her husband's exhaustion, and the cost of international travel packages. I mentioned, between sips, that I had some money set aside from my retirement, and I could help. It wasn't a loan. It was a gift. I wanted to see my grandkids discovering the world, and I wanted to be there too, even if only as silent company. She smiled right away, said it would be the last big trip with the whole family, and with that smile, she won me over again. But on the morning of the trip, something felt wrong. There was a strange air in the house, a silence heavier than usual. I felt it as soon as I came down the stairs. All the suitcases were by the front door except mine. The boys were on the couch, laughing quietly at their phones. Mariana and her husband were in the kitchen, whispering. When they saw me, they exchanged brief glances, like people bracing for the thunder after the lightning. It was Mariana who spoke, with that gentle tone she always used when she wanted me to accept something without protest. "Dad, we talked, and we decided, you're not coming anymore. We think it's for the best." Right away, her husband cleared his throat and added, with mock humor, "Old folks belong at home watching TV, right? Less work for us." The boys laughed out loudly. They laughed not out of malice, but with a kind of dismissiveness that's even worse. They laughed because the adults in the house had taught them that it's okay to laugh at someone who's grown old so long as he doesn't fight back. I just stood there, coffee cooling in my hand. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I just looked at each one of them, as if seeing for the first time what had always been there but I had refused to see. Mariana couldn't hold my gaze. Her husband pretended to be distracted. And the boys, well, they were just copying what they'd been shown. I walked to the corner of the room, picked up my suitcase, and took it back to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the bed. The clock read 6:48 a.m. Their flight was at 9:25. We had time, too much time for the disappointment to settle in slowly, like a light drizzle that doesn't make a fuss but soaks everything to the bone. I thought about the photos I wouldn't take, the meals I wouldn't share, the sound of laughter in foreign restaurants where my absence wouldn't even be mentioned. And I also thought about the 38,750 reals that had left my account to fund it all, from flights and accommodations to the extras meant to make the experience memorable for the kids. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't, because there was something deeper there. It wasn't just a disregard of people who saw me as a burden. It was a realization that, to them, I wasn't even worth the trouble of a proper goodbye. I heard their voices downstairs. Mariana said, "Let's go or we'll miss the flight." And her husband replied something like, "Leave the old man be. It's better this way." The door slammed with a muffled thud. The car engine started, and the sound slowly faded, as if every meter driven pulled away what little respect was left. But they mistook my silence for surrender. They mistook my calm for acceptance. And they forgot one small detail. I wasn't just the old man. I was the account holder, the one responsible for the travel agency that issued the vouchers. The name behind the credit card contract the very card in my daughter's wallet. I wasn't in a hurry. It was still just 7 a.m., and I had exactly 2 hours and 25 minutes to return with surgical precision every drop of the humiliation they had made me swallow. But that's a story for the next chapter. The sound of the gate closing still echoed when I sat back down on the edge of the bed. The room felt bigger in that moment, perhaps, because it had just been emptied of the hope that had kept me company for weeks. The suitcase beside me, still untouched, was now a silent reminder of the absence they had imposed on me. It still held the carefully folded clothes, the new pair of sneakers I would no longer wear, the small bottle of cologne I had saved for special occasions. I hadn't saved it out of vanity, but because, somewhere deep inside, I still believed that unique moments deserved small rituals. But they had decided there would be no moment for me at all. I sat there in silence. The whole house was quiet, except for a little bird perched on the window ledge. It looked at me with its head tilted, as if sensing something. Maybe I should have been crying, shouting, calling someone, but I did what I've always done throughout my life. I stayed quiet. And they've always misread this silence of mine, always thought my stillness was weakness, that my restraint was submission. They were always wrong. The truth is, silence is the last home where dignity resides. When you lose everything, even your pride, you still have the right not to react the way they expect. That was all I had left in that moment, silence, and I wielded it like someone handling an ancestral weapon. A blade sharpened across generations. The same blade my father used when he preferred a firm gaze over a useless argument. The same one my mother used when she said, curtly, understood, and ended the matter right then and there, without giving anyone the pleasure of a fight. I went down the stairs slowly. The living room still smelled of my son-in-law's cheap cologne, mixed with the last of the coffee no one had finished. Dirty mugs were scattered across the table. The sofa was a mess, and the turned-off television reflected my tired image in its dark screen. I looked at myself for a moment. It felt like I had aged 10 years since breakfast. But there was something new in my face, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete clarity. I walked into the kitchen and made a fresh cup of coffee. The usual ritual, water heating, the cloth filter I refused to replace with modern capsules, the strong aroma of the grounds filling the air. I sat on the porch and stared at the street. Life continued outside. People passing, a noisy bus, a barking dog. Just another Monday for those who've never been left behind. I took my phone from my pocket. There was still time. Their flight wouldn't depart until 9:25 a.m. I checked my notifications. No messages. No missed calls. Of course not. In their minds, the old man had been dealt with and left behind like some outdated object in a modern room. They had laughed before leaving. Laughed loudly. Because only those who are sure nothing will change laugh that way. Only those who think humiliation is harmless laugh without restraint. They didn't know it, but my silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. I opened the banking app. The screen asked for my password. I typed it slowly, like someone writing a letter meant to be read at the exact right moment. The balance was there, intact. No pending charges. All the travel packages were still scheduled to be billed to the card linked to my account. The name on the vouchers mine. The hotel reservation in Cancun, made with my tax ID. The international travel insurance, paid under my name. They had everything except what mattered most, control over it. I slid my finger to the frequent contacts tab. There it was, my bank manager's number. An old acquaintance. Someone who had always treated me with respect, no rush, no condescension. I called. She answered with the voice of someone who knows who it is just by the number. Good morning, Mr. Alfredo, good morning. I need to make a change, of course. Is it urgent? Yes. Emotional urgency. She didn't understand right away, but she understood enough not to ask more. I explained what I needed. An immediate transfer of all funds to a personal safety account I had previously set up. I also requested the temporary blocking of all link cards. And lastly, I asked that the central office be notified in case of any future attempts to contest the actions. All done in silence. No outburst, no scandal. Just the calm of someone who realized far too late that silence is the cruelest way to be heard when no one is listening anymore. I finished my coffee, looked up at the sky, took the photo of my late mother from my wallet. The woman who used to say, "An old man who is left behind doesn't need to run. He just needs to know which door to close." And I closed the door, both literally and symbolically. The family had gone on their trip, but at that moment, I was the one who departed, not to another country, but to a new way of existing, one where my silence would finally be respected because now it came with consequence. There were 35 minutes left until their flight when I grabbed the car keys, put on the blue dress shirt my wife used to love, the only one still neatly pressed in the closet, and left the house. The neighborhood was still slowly waking up. A few doors opened. The smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery on the corner, and an old woman swept her sidewalk with her usual expression. To the world, it was just another morning. But to me, it was the day I would bury without flowers or a funeral the illusion that there was still a place for me in that family. The drive to the bank was quick. I know every street in that neighborhood, every shortcut to avoid the long traffic lights, every speed bump that calls for a gentle brake. I parked under the shade of a flamboyant tree, as I always did. The bank entrance was still quiet. A security guard recognized me, smiled, and opened the door without hesitation. "Good morning, Mr. Alfredo," I nodded. There was no room for long pleasantries that day. Time wasn't the enemy, but it had to be respected. I had a plan, and the clock was part of it. My bank manager was already waiting, as punctual as the humiliation my family had handed me that morning. She was seated at the desk in the private meeting room, a folder in front of her and the system already open. She offered water, coffee. I declined. "Today is just business," I said, and she understood. I like people who understand without asking too many questions. The first action was simple. I confirmed the transfer of all funds to a backup account I'd been maintaining for nearly a year. I had created that account as a precaution, after an uncomfortable conversation with my son-in-law at a Sunday dinner. He had joked, as people do when they're not joking, that it'd be good to know Grandpa's passwords, just in case he forgets, right? That bothered me more than I admitted at the time. That night, I logged into online banking and set up the safety account. I moved small amounts into it every month, without anyone knowing. Today, it became the foundation of my independence. Next, I requested the blocking of all cards linked to my primary account, including Mariana's, my daughter's. "But her card is being used abroad, Mr. Alfredo. This could cause problems." I simply looked the manager in the eyes. She understood that I didn't care about their problems. For the first time in my life, I truly didn't care. Then, I asked for an international alert for suspicious activity. From now on, the bank would automatically block and notify me of any attempt to withdraw or make purchases outside of the country. In banking terms, that's called credit protection. But to me, it was a message. A silent, formal message. No insults, no shouting. Just a message that says, "You may have left me behind at breakfast, but dinner belongs to me." Finally, I asked for an email to be sent to the travel agency that had issued the packages. I informed them that any changes or refund requests could only be processed with my formal authorization. That resort reservation for 5 people in Cancun now depended on one single click from me to remain active. And that click would never come. Before I left, the manager handed me a printed copy of everything. I placed it in my shirt pocket. It was just paper, but at that moment, it carried the weight of emancipation. The missing signature and the emotional divorce from those people I once called family. I walked back to the car with calm steps. I checked the time, 9:07. Their boarding gate had probably already closed. Seat belts were being fastened. The plane was likely already taxiing down the runway, and the credit card was just about to be declined on its first attempt in Mexican territory. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It wasn't joy in their suffering. It was just a breath. The kind of relief only felt by someone who finally understands that you don't need to shout to be heard, that you don't need to retaliate with violence when you have the right tools and your name on the contract. I started the car, turned on the radio. An old song was playing, one Mariana used to hum in the back seat as a child. For a second, I allowed myself to remember the small, innocent version of her, before ambition and contempt took over. Then, I turned the radio off, because the past, when it hurts too much, needs to be silenced. Just like I was, and just like they will be. Boarding had gone smoothly. Gate 18, in the international wing, was spacious, with cushioned seats and a wide view of the aircraft lined up on the tarmac. Mariana looked fulfilled. She walked with her phone in hand, recording short videos to post later. She showed the kids stretching out in the lounge chairs, showed her husband holding up the passports, smiling like someone who had no idea what shame tastes like. Look at us heading to Cancun, folks. Read the caption she would post minutes later, still in the boarding line. She had no idea that the only thing going for that day would be her own arrogance. The nearly 10-hour flight was comfortable, with full on-board service. The kids stayed busy with cartoons and games. The son-in-law slept deeply, like someone living a dream. And Mariana, well, Mariana did what she always does, planned her next display of status. Still in the airport lobby after landing in Mexico, she opened the reservation app and confirmed check-in at the 5-star beachfront hotel, with a view of the private cove, to balcony suites, and included spa services. They called a private car. The driver was waiting with an electronic sign displaying the family's last name. Everything was going perfectly. In Mariana's mind, all of it was well-deserved, a reward for years of putting up with a stubborn father and a passive mother. After all, she had always believed that what she called the old man's estate already belonged to her by moral right. She just didn't realize that the word right does not replace the word respect, and that without respect, every privilege rots. They arrived at the hotel in grand style. The lobby was a spectacle of white marble and tinted glass. There was an indoor fountain and the scent of lavender in the air. The concierge welcomed them with a rehearsed smile, offering a glass of champagne. Mariana, already tasting the flavor of superiority, handed over her father's credit card to confirm the reservation. The receptionist, dressed in a flawless suit and speaking with a heavy accent, typed the information in lightly and waited. Silence. The first attempt failed. Mariana furrowed her brow but kept her composure. Must be the internet here. Try again. Please. The receptionist tried again. Nothing. He looked at the screen, then at her. Segura. Lo siento. Tarjeta rechazada. The phrase hit the marble floor like a stone. The son-in-law stepped forward, trying to understand. What do you mean? It's all paid. Everything was done in advance. But the system was clear. Payment declined. Limit blocked. The reservation, though under Mr. Alfredo's name, was pending payment confirmation. No payment, no stay. The son-in-law tried to call the bank's international number, but the line was jammed. Mariana, now trembling, tried other cards, all her personal ones, but none had the limit needed to cover the 34,000 reals hotel bill. The hotel manager, noticing their discomfort, invited them to sit on one of the couches while they sorted things out. But the invitation had the taste of a polite eviction. The kids started asking why they weren't in the room yet. The son-in-law began to sweat. Mariana gripped her phone as if that could somehow make the money appear, the money she believed was hers by right. Finally, she sent a message, a single one, very short. "Dad, what did you do?" The answer, as always, came with the punctuality of my calm. "Nothing." I had already decided that silence would be my legacy. They mocked me as if I were an obstacle to their comfort, as if I were the last chair at the dinner table, the one everyone tries to avoid. They voted to exclude me from the trip, as if they were voting to remove an old piece of furniture from the living room. Fine, the house was still mine, and so was the card. Mariana then tried a different approach, the voice message app. She sent me a 27-second audio clip, crying, her voice shaky. She said the boys were tired, that the hotel was expensive, that they had no way to go back. She said I couldn't do this to her, that I couldn't play with the stability of the family. Play. She thought this was a game. The game began when they said, "Old folks belong at home watching TV. The difference isn't like them." I knew exactly how it ends. The phone began to vibrate for the first time at 4:22 p.m. It sat on the side table out on the porch, next to a still warm cup of tea. I wasn't nearby. I was in the kitchen, slicing the fresh bread I had bought that morning. It had been a long time since I'd eaten warm bread, the kind that cracks when you break it with your hands. My old battery radio played some random program at a low volume, and the muffled ringtone from the cell phone was like a mosquito buzzing near the ear, persistent, but irrelevant. It wasn't the first time my daughter had ignored me, but it was the first time she desperately wanted to be heard. Mariana seemed to have suddenly remembered my existence, only now, not as a father, but as the only viable source of credit within a 10,000-kilometer radius. Her name flashed on the screen, then her husband's, then an international number. Messages, voice notes, calls, all piled up like overdue bills. But that day, I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. When I finally looked at the phone, there were 17 missed calls and 23 messages. Some were just one word, "Dad." Others were longer, written in haste, full of typos, like her fingers were trembling. "Dad, please pick up. We need to talk to you. They won't let us through here. The kids are hungry. They're tired. Don't do this to us." There were also voice messages, many. In one of them, Mariana was crying, really crying, sobbing. She said she was sorry, that she just wanted to fix it, that she didn't know it would come to this, that she just wanted to rest a little. She spoke with a mix of desperation and shame, the kind of shame that comes to those who begin to realize that humiliating a father can get expensive when the father decides to stand up from his chair. In another voice note, the son-in-law took on a colder tone. He said I had no right to block the trip funds, that it was illegal, and that this won't stay like this. He spoke in the same voice he had used just hours before, laughing at the kitchen table, saying old people should just stay home and watch TV. Only now, the TV had changed. Now, he was the one watching his own arrogance be returned to him in the form of silence. I listened to every voice message, one by one, without hurry. Then, I set the phone back down on the table. I didn't reply, didn't delete anything, didn't block anyone. I just left it there, because some things are better answered by time than by any word, and because what I had to say, I had already said it. When I didn't get in the car that morning, when I put on the blue shirt, when I walked into the bank, when I deactivated the card, I had spoken. They just never knew how to listen. That night, while eating a simple bowl of soup, I sat in the living room armchair and looked at the picture frame on the shelf. The last complete family photo was nearly 15 years old. We were at a country house. Mariana still smiled in a way that didn't know ambition. The son-in-law was barely visible. The kids didn't even exist yet. I was smiling too. But the man in that photo, he still thought he was loved. Today, I know, I was useful. Then, disposable. And now I'm an obstacle, a burden, an old man to be left at home watching TV while the modern family enjoys the world on his dime. But what they didn't expect was that the old man was tired of being a background character in his own story. The next morning, the phone vibrated again. More calls, more messages. I simply turned on the radio. An old song was playing. I grabbed my cane, stood up slowly, stepped onto the porch, took a deep breath, and gave thanks for the silence. Because in that moment, the silence was mine, and theirs was the desperation. The bamboo chair on the porch was old, yes, but still sturdy. It had been an anniversary gift, handmade by a craftsman from Minas who no longer worked. The seat creaked a little, but it followed the body, as if it were a part of it. And that's where I sat, on that stuffy late afternoon, with the sun nearly touching the top of the wall and the smell of warm earth rising from the garden. Teresa brought coffee, as she always did when something serious was happening, but no one wanted to say it out loud. She placed the cup next to the turned-off radio, ran her hand gently across my shoulder, and went to tend to the plants. The phone started ringing. On the side table at 5:02 p.m., it was Mariana. No surprise. By now, she and the others were probably parched at the check-in counter, trying to understand why the tickets had vanished from the system, why the card wasn't working, why the line had stopped moving. And then the ritual began. Call, message, call again, voice note. It was like a symphony of guilt, regret, and panic, but one that only played once the gates were shut, and arrogance could no longer buy a seat. The number of calls kept rising. The son-in-law, more aggressive, sent messages laced with veiled accusations, as if the blame had suddenly changed sides. Even the grandkids tried. Grandpa, please pick up. I read everything, not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was important that, for once, they put it in writing, that they spoke to me, even in desperation. It was curious how they only remembered I existed when something jammed. When they were making plans, I was left out like an old couch. But now I was the outlet they needed back, and I was the only source of power. The most telling thing of all was the tone. There was no apology, not even acknowledgement of what they had said that morning. No one said sorry for calling me an old man who should stay home watching TV. They just wanted the issue resolved. The glitch, the inconvenience, the logistical error. They couldn't see that the real issue was the root of it all, the disrespect disguised as modernity, the exclusion dressed up as a collective decision. They wanted me to fix it as I always had, without questions, without hurt, without consequence. But that old part of me had left along with the last laugh I heard in that living room. Teresa came back with a small plate of bread and cheese and sat next to me. She didn't ask anything. She didn't mention the messages that kept vibrating one after another on the phone. She only said, with a serene look in her eyes, "You did what had to be done." I nodded. For the first time, I felt that my reaction or lack of one spoke louder than any outburst. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the silence of someone who refuses to be humiliated and still open his wallet. On the phone screen, a bank notification popped up. Transaction successfully updated. Cards blocked. I knew that from that moment on, more tears would come, more guilt, more versions, maybe even lies. But there, in that bamboo chair, I was no longer the disposable old man. I was the man who had decided to stop financing his own rejection. As night fell, I picked up the radio, turned the dial slowly, and tuned into some random station. An old bolero was playing, one of those songs that stick to the soul after just one listen. I didn't know its name, but I smiled, because somehow that song was my message. And back at the airport, between missed calls and denied boarding passes, they finally understood. When an old man goes silent, It's because he's already decided who is and who isn't worth the price of his love. The next day, around 10 a.m., I heard the gate slam 3 times. That metallic sound it only made when someone arrived angry or in a rush. Out on the porch, the sky was still clear, but the air already carried a heaviness that came from somewhere down the street. Teresa pulled back the living room curtain, peeked through the slats, and then crossed her arms. "They're back," she said simply. And so I sat again in the bamboo chair, the one that already knew every ache in my body, and now had begun to hold the scars of my soul. The car pulled up crooked, the tires scraping the curb like a violent gesture. Mariana got out first, her hair tied hastily, eyes red like someone who had spent the night trying to understand what went wrong. Her husband followed, shouting loud enough to be heard by the entire neighborhood, or maybe just loud enough to convince himself he was right. The grandkids didn't get out. They stayed inside the car, still, with the look of children seeing, for the first time, that the old man in the house knew more than they ever imagined. She shoved the gate open and climbed the porch steps like someone demanding answers. But all she found was my silence, the same silence from yesterday, the same one they had mistaken for weakness. I didn't stand up, didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her, like someone who sees the reflection of decades unresolved, of choices returning to collect the bill. "What did you do with our money?" she said, her voice already cracking, trying to balance rage and shame. "You destroyed everything, ruined our trip, our planning, our family." The word family hit me like a stone. That family who voted to leave me behind. The same ones who laughed while I sat forgotten in the living room chair like a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. The son-in-law stepped forward, finger pointed like someone blaming the fire for their own carelessness with matches. He ranted about financial loss, about irresponsibility, about public humiliation. He said they were treated like scammers at the airport, that other passengers looked at them with disgust. And once again, I was a villain in their version of the story, not for reacting, but for finally saying no. That's when I spoke. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said it calm and low but firm this time. "You got to know what it feels like to be left out." Mariana froze. The son-in-law stopped mid-sentence. For the first time, the house was quiet. Teresa, still standing behind the half-open door, stayed there solid as ever. She didn't intervene. She knew that line was the final piece of the puzzle. My daughter tried to backtrack, said it was a misunderstanding, that yesterday's thing was a joke gone too far, that everyone had been stressed, that the heat of the moment made things worse. But the truth is, what people say while laughing is often what they really feel. In her words, that day, were too cold to have come from just the mouth. They tried to justify, to beg, to threaten, but there was nothing left to be done. The bank wouldn't reverse anything, and neither would I. What had been done couldn't be undone, because it was never just about the money. It was about the place they gave me, and the place I chose to walk away from. In the end, they got back in the car. My daughter was crying. The son-in-law was muttering to himself. The grandkids stared out the window, their eyes hollow. And I stayed there, in the bamboo chair, with an empty cup and a light chest. Because for the first time in a long time, they didn't see me as an old man. They saw me as someone who remembers, and who sometimes answers. That afternoon passed like the end of a season. There was no wind, yet everything felt in motion. The gate had been closed for hours, and still, the sound of the lock echoed in my mind. Mariana didn't call again, nor did her husband. Their silence no longer bothered me. It was, in fact, the only kind of respect they seemed capable of offering. Later, Teresa brought me a cup of coffee, no questions asked. Like someone who understands that some decisions only need time to complete themselves. At the end of the day, I sat at the old desk in the bedroom, the one I'd inherited from my father. The darkened wood held more than just papers. It held stories. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were all the important family documents: will, deed, power of attorney, insurance policies. Funny how, for so many years, those papers had felt distant, as if I still had decades ahead and nothing ever needed changing. But now, after everything, I knew it was time to write a different story. One that didn't begin with "we voted" and end with "you not coming." The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I arrived early at the office. He'd known me for years. He was the one who drafted the first will, back when everything still felt like hope, and my daughter still called me a hero. When he saw me, he understood something had shifted. "So this is it?" he asked, after calmly listening to everything I recounted. I nodded. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. The new document was drafted right then, with details I'd already outlined during countless sleepless nights. The bulk of my estate would no longer go to Mariana. The properties, the investments, the retirement fund, even the family cottage, everything would be redirected. A significant portion would go to a foundation for abandoned elders, which I'd learned about through an old colleague. Another part to a grandson who, despite the distance, never mocked my age or treated me like a burden. The rest would go to Teresa, who stood by me not out of convenience but out of conviction. My lawyer, with his usual precision, printed the documents and read each clause aloud. And when everything was reviewed, he handed me the pen, one of those heavy, dark metal pens, a graduation gift. I held it firmly, like someone gripping a sword, and I signed .once, .twice, 3 times. Each stroke of my signature was a line severing the umbilical cord from the illusion that being a father was enough to be loved. When we finished, he handed me a stamped copy. I tucked it into my jacket pocket and walked out with my head high. There was no weight, only relief. On the way back, I stopped at a stationery store and bought a thick envelope. At home, I slipped the new will inside and wrote on the front, by hand, to be read after my silence. I placed it in the safe, next to the old manila folder, the one that no longer spoke of who I was, but of who I'd chosen to stop being. That evening, I sat with Teresa on the porch. She looked at me the same way she always did, with the eyes of someone who never had to belittle me to feel big. She told me an old story from her youth, as she often did when she wanted to distract me. And I listened. I smiled. And inside, I understood. The greatest inheritance I could ever leave was leaving myself in peace. Exclusion, when it cuts through the years like a dull knife, often hides behind disguises. Disguises of jokes, forced care. It's better for you. We thought of everyone. But deep down, what happened in that room, that cruel vote, was just the last petal of a flower that had been wilting for decades. And me, I simply refused to keep watering it. That morning after signing the new will dawned gray, but inside me there was no fog. There was a different light, a firm clarity, as if I had finally closed the door that had been creaking for years. I sat at the kitchen table with Teresa. We drank coffee in silence. Then I went to the office. The first thing I did was change all the passwords: bank, health plan, email, even the digital lock on the house. Not out of revenge, but for protection. Protection from myself, from my own naivety. That part of me that still believed blood ties were made of honor. They're not. They're made of choice. And when their choice was to exclude me, mine was to free myself. I started a simple list in an old black-covered notebook. What is only mine? I wrote at the top. Not possessions, but routines. Moments, places, soon. The answers came. The bench in the park where no one rushes me. The butcher who still calls me sir with respect. The city library where I'm welcome without having to prove my worth. And most important, my own home. My own time, my own voice, the one silenced for years by laughter and decisions made at dinners, where my presence was only part of the scenery. I also made another list. Who still sees me? It was short but honest. An old friend from the barracks who still sent messages on unexpected dates. A neighbor who asked how I was even when the answer was long. Teresa, who knew me in silences. And the youngest grandson, who once asked about my childhood with genuine curiosity, not with the boredom of the others. I started going to the senior gym. The first week was hard. My body protested. My knees creaked. But after a while, the look in the mirror began to change. It wasn't vanity. It was posture. Walking upright after a lifetime bent to fit others' expectations was an act of resistance. Every kilometer on the treadmill was a piece of me coming back. One morning, the youngest grandson visited. He came alone. He said he wanted to understand why all this had happened. And for the first time, I told him everything without censorship. He listened, didn't defend his mother, didn't cry. He just said, "Grandpa, can I come more often?" And I said yes, firmly, without needing anyone's permission. Later, I opened the box where I kept old objects. I found a note Marietta wrote me when she was 7, saying I was the best dad in the world. I put it back, not with sadness, but with a kind of gratitude only felt by those who learn to let go without losing memory. Because forgiving is not forgetting. It's just taking the weight off your own shoulders and letting the other deal with the mess they made. In the following days, I began to renovate the garden myself. Hands in the soil, smell of fertilizer, dirty nails. With every new plant, a thought. This grows because it's watered. My exclusion was the water that was missing, and I was tired of waiting for rain from others' hands. Now, it was me who opened the tap. Teresa watched everything from afar, without interrupting. One afternoon, she said, "You seem lighter." I replied, "I no longer carry anyone on my back." She smiled, the kind of smile you give when you see someone return from a long journey inside themselves. And that's how I understood. When they remove you from the family portrait, you don't disappear. You just get your own frame. And there, in my corner, on my time, in my rediscovered strength, I wrote with all the letters, even if only inside myself. Never call me a burden again. The arrival of the year's end brought with it that thick, almost ceremonial silence that only December can pour over the streets. The houses in the neighborhood were lit with blinking lights, supermarkets decorated with tired wreaths, and everyone hurriedly crossing off gift lists and making promises of togetherness. That would last only until dessert, and I, for the first time in many years, felt no anxiety. I felt a new kind of peace, made of chosen absence. Every Christmas, I was always the first to leave the table, pretending to be sleepy or nursing a knee ache, just to avoid watching the dinner turn into a stage of indifference. But that year, there was no table for me, and strangely, that comforted me, because now, the absence was my decision, not the exclusion of a family jury armed with sarcasm. I received an invitation. Yes. It came by message from my daughter, with warm words and a polite request. "Dad, if you want to come for Christmas, we're having dinner here at 8 p.m. There will be a place for you." I read and reread the phrase several times. A place for you. A corner on the couch. A seat at the far end of the table. A plastic fork set apart like a gesture of pity. I closed the phone. Didn't respond. On the night of the 24th, I wore my best cotton shirt buttoned all the way to the neck, just like I did back when going to Christmas Mass was still an honest commitment. Teresa came out of the bedroom in a navy blue dress she only wore on special occasions. We both knew that night was special not for what we would see, but for what we had overcome. We took the car and went to the home of an old friend of mine, from the days when I still wore boots and answered to a rank. He was widowed too. He was waiting for us with a small table, but with 3 seats, one reserved with a handwritten card, for the one who never stopped being a real man. We toasted with cheap wine, ate French toast made with stale bread, and talked about the grandchildren who are good and those who still don't understand the value of presents without interest. And at one point, I just looked around and thought, this is it. This is where I belong. Where my presence is a choice, not a convenience. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in the old house where I was once king and then invisible, an empty chair waited. It was the only one at the table without a folded napkin, without a utensil beside it, an absence heavier than any forgotten gift. The grandchildren whispered. Mariana tried to keep smiling, but her gaze kept returning to that corner, as if she expected me to appear at any moment, with tired eyes and dragging steps, ready to accept whatever little remained on the plate. But I didn't go, not out of pride, not out of revenge, simply because I no longer fit there. The next morning, I found a Christmas basket at the gate, left by someone. Inside were supermarket cookies, a cheap wine, the same one we toasted with the night before, and a note. Sorry if we crossed the line. There's still time to come back. I left the basket on the sidewalk. The sun soon found it. I went back inside, sat with Teresa on the porch, and opened my black notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote the year's last sentence. I won't return to tables where I was the laughing stock. And then, with a cup of black coffee between my hands and the distant sound of a church bell, I raised my final toast, not out of revenge, not out of pride, but for having finally learned that sometimes the greatest Christmas gift is chosen silence, and an empty seat where, at last, dignity found its place.